My God. Oh my God.
You did it. I have lots of questions for you, but just thank you so much for making the time to join. It's a challenging drag you into the 21st century.
Well, no, thank you very much for hosting me, and thank you very much for organizing this conversation, which I think is very important. And COVID-19 had to make sure that at least I can get connected to the 21st century in one way or the other. And after our failed Africa Day conversation head-to-head on Monday, I had to really dig deeper to get connected. So thank you very much for giving me and pushing me to the edge.
You know, it's such a pleasure, and thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, we've had so many comments from people already. So excited to be talking with you. I've had a lot of questions for you, but I wanted to start off with checking in on how are you doing? How are things in Harare and in Zimbabwe? No, it's a challenging time for many people, but how are you doing? How are you doing at the moment?
Well, firstly, let me say these are trying times for all of us, especially for us here in the museum sectors. And Zimbabwe at the moment, I'm sure the cases have risen to 132 from yesterday. But I would like to say that as an institution, the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, we have been closed for a long time, and we closed, I'm sure, mid-March. And after we consulted with our authorities, because we thought that we are a high-risk place, and our permanent secretary, Dr. Chikukwa, advised us to close to the public. So we've been shut, but later on we had to come back to make sure that we keep the National Gallery wheels being oiled all the time. And that has not been easy because we are working with a very skeleton staff. And as I said earlier on in our discussion, that when I got appointed to be the acting director, and in the middle of our handover, takeover with the former director, Mrs. Doreen Sibanda, lockdown arrived. So that has not been easy. And so we are keeping on soldiering on, but it's not an easy task. As you already know that, I mean, like many other public institutions across the world, whether with funding or no funding, we are all being affected.
Absolutely, and it's been, you know, kind of very humbling to also see how. But first of all, also I want to congratulate you also on the position. You have big shoes to fill, you know, but we're very excited about what lies ahead. And what responses have you had as a museum and as an institution so far to the realities of the pandemic? I mean, what are you busy with?
Well, firstly, I would like to say we have got a number of exhibitions. We have got David Palacio, a Cuban artist exhibition, which was supposed to open on the 17th of March. And immediately when we were told to shut down the gallery to the public, so the exhibition could not happen. And David, we had already organized all the refreshments and all that. So that exhibition is in quarantine.
Okay,
then
yeah.
We also have Freedom Through the Eyes of General Tongogara, which opened early this year, where we had in pieces. And when COVID-19 arrived, that became a thing of the past. And the feedback was to also look at how best can these exhibitions that are in quarantine be visible to our audience. And so that's what we've been trying to battle with. And people commenting, also knowing what is happening across the world, that many are actually going virtual. So that's what we are trying to do, and trying to see how we can establish a digital back office for us to be able to boost our online visibility.
And I think, you know, like it's been in many museums, it's been a kind of a very important kind of like understanding, of course, that, you know, so much of our outward facing work is, for the moment anyway, kind of outward facing. But I also think, you know, through digital platforms or social media, I think it's also been an interesting process for also I think that we're also learning a lot, steep learning curve for everybody. But like, I think it is a kind of a connection that I think is something that's going to be very, very powerful for us also in the future, kind of a push that I think is also very positive. But of course, we're really, really looking forward to that moment again of meeting. And I think, you know, what you say about the opening and that kind of hugging and kissing, you know, I think so much of our work, you know, in individual arts and is so much about that human connection. And that's certainly kind of a very big absent right now in terms of like that kind of proximity or even intimacy. But Raphael, I have a couple of questions for you that's also around the kind of work that you have done as a curator, but also, you know, the National Gallery of Zimbabwe as an institution. You've been an absolute leader for more than a decade in our sector and also our region, but beyond our region, I have amazing, incredible admiration for the work that you've done. Also, and kind of very, if I can call it, over trying circumstances. You know, the work that the National Gallery of Zimbabwe has been continuously doing within a very tumultuous the Zimbabwean Pavilion in Venice. And I have this picture in my head when I think about you always. I think it was the first one that you did. There was a Facebook post of you on a boat with crates on the way to the and it was in 2011, I think, was the first one on the way to kind of install the exhibition. And we know how challenging Venice is and how difficult it is. And you've done so much and continuously kind of like flying the flag, so to speak. But just thank you for all that work. It's really, really extraordinary. But do you want to maybe talk about some of that and what it means to be so busy in the world in such a way, such an engaged way?
Well, I mean, firstly, I would like to say, I mean, the resilience of the Zimbabwean artists is something which I would also want to credit to the achievements that we as National Gallery have been able to do across the board. But I would also want to pay tribute to our those who came before us, the founding director of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, or the National Gallery of Rhodesia then, who was Frank McEwen. So when I started working here at the National Gallery, the former director, Mrs. Doreen Sibanda, was very, very instrumental, because we have to work as a team to be able to realize a project of that magnitude. But I would like to say that the Venice Biennale project, it goes back to a long time ago. And I would like to say that the first director of the Johannesburg Biennale, the second Johannesburg Biennale, Okwi and Wenzo the late, is one of the key figures that I would also want to credit, because when I worked alongside Okwi as a volunteer at the Joburg Biennale, it really inspired me. And then I returned back to Zimbabwe, and later on I took a residency to Switzerland, which was supported by a Pro Helvetia. So that residence included a trip to Venice. And this was one. So it was myself and Pet Mautwa, who is an artist who is based at the Back Factory Studios. And we started asking ourselves about the visibility of African countries at the Venice Biennale. And that's when the idea of wanting to do a Zimbabwean pavilion started. Then I met who was then the managing editor of Flash Art, Michele Robecki, and we deliberated, we started exchanging, and later on I returned back to Zimbabwe, and I curated an exhibition in 2004, which was called Visions of Zimbabwe, at the gallery. That exhibition, the idea was also to take it to Venice in 2005. So through Michele Robecki, Andrea Rose, who was the head of visual arts at the British Council, we managed to lobby and met with the 3 Spanish two Spanish ladies who were the curator for the 2005 Venice Biennale. I'm sure it was Rosa Martini and the other lady. And I met them in London, and we had a conversation, but we could not raise the funds for us to be able to take the Visions of Zimbabwe to Venice. So my arrival at the National Gallery was a great opportunity. Not only that, but we had already also started working when I was still working for the Puma Creative Africa Network. We also wanted to take it to Venice. So through Marianne Baviera, she had already joined. So when we started chatting about the idea of the Zimbabwean Pavilion, she thought it was a brilliant idea. So it's a great opportunity for us to be able to do it. I also talked to Andrea Rose, who said, listen, we failed in 2005. This is our moment to do it. So then I had to talk to my director, Mrs. Doreen Sibanda, who says, well, if we can get the funds, let's do it. And then I was also invited as part of the Curating Africa Network project, which was organized by Tate. So it was myself, the late BC, Ngone Fall, Maskerem, and many others. So it was at that moment that Marie Claude managed to send a representative to come and meet me in London, as much as I was also with the British Council. So that's when everything started, and the British Council put some funding into the project. Then the Museum of Monaco also put some funding into the project. When I came back to Zimbabwe, we had already funding in our basket. So the next thing was for us to approach our government, where we said, listen, the basket is half full and we cannot fly our Zimbabwean flag at Venice with other people's monies. And then Minister of Culture, Education and Culture, Senator David Coulthard, said, call for a press conference, and the government pledged the money. And that was the beginning of Zimbabwe in 2011, where we featured Tafuma Gutsa, Barry Biko, Kelvin Dondo, and Mishek Masamvu. So that was the beginning of the project, but I would like to credit the pioneers, the artists, and also the funders who also funded, and the government for them to realize the importance of us not flying our Zimbabwean flag with other people's monies.
That's incredible, and you're right that it's such an important kind of acknowledgement to make as well. Raphael, why is Venice important, or why is it important that we also kind of connect across these divides, given that we also face often very specific kind of issues within our own context? How do you navigate this kind of like the immediacy of the institution's kind of requirements and needs, and also this kind of like the push to be part of something else that's large and outside? And I want to also get to that a little bit to talk about how we do that maybe also better regionally, kind of with outside our borders. But yeah, I'm curious about that motivation as well.
Well, sometimes it's like where other people see problems, you see opportunities. And for the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, that's one of the key things that right from its founding, from its foundation, when Frank McEwen arrived here, many people doubted Frank McEwen. But Frank McEwen had to think outside the box because of his network in Europe and all that, and was able to take the Zimbabwean art scene to the Rodin Museum, to MoMA, to all those bigger spaces in the Western world. So when you are looking back into that history, that becomes a motivation. But I would like to say the Venice Biennale, it's happening outside the African continent, but it is a very important global art event that us as Africans, we need to be part and parcel of the global art community. We cannot shy away from the global art community and keep complaining in the peripheries or in the terraces and say, the West has done this, the West has done that. What have we done ourselves for us to get out there? Because remember, when we showed Zimbabwe at the Venice Biennale, nobody expected us to be in Venice. But created opportunities for the Zimbabwean artists. As you know, that Zimbabwe is still under sanctions. That is a big motivation, so much that those artists can also be shown, can be seen at this global stage. And because we have got limited platforms here in Zimbabwe with the National Gallery of Zimbabwe and very few private galleries. We are not like South Africa where so many private galleries. The traffic of international collectors is very huge. So with those challenges, we see opportunities for us to actually move to another stage. And I'm sure as a region, there's a need for us to think about how we can create these opportunities also back here in the continent. I'm sure the death of the Johannesburg Biennale is something which is sad, but anyway, it gave birth to the art fairs that are now happening with the Cape Town Art Fair, the Johannesburg Art Fair, now we've got the Latitude, and also the idea, the existence of the Zeitz MOCAA in Cape Town. It's also very, very important for the continent because the artists of the continent can have a home to be enjoyed and to be seen by the African audience.
No, thank you, Raphael. And I think that's definitely, you know, it's something that we take also very seriously. I want to pick up a little bit on just the you said about the absence of the Biennale. Of course, Dakar is still such an important, you know, kind of place for us. And, you know, having had the opportunity to travel a couple of times over the last decade and a half, it's been, you know, really informative and important place. But we do need, and I think something that we keep on coming back to is the notion that it's now important that we also shape and develop knowledge systems and discourses that is developed also alongside and outside of the kind of commercial art world. Because I do think and feel also that so much of like what we understand of contemporary African art is shaped elsewhere, or seemingly so. And they are kind of important initiatives, and we kind of also need to develop those going.
Well, I mean, there's been a number of initiatives that have come out in the continent, which I think if we continue at that pace, but it is unfortunate that it's a very slow pace we are moving as a continent. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge that the developments that took place in Nigeria, which the formulation of the CCA Lagos by the late sister of mine, Isi, and also your character, Koyo, when she started the raw material company in Dakar, and the Douala Arts in Douala. It's one of the key elements that have been developed within the continent that we look at and we say, I used to say to so many people that say, these ladies are very, very important to the development of contemporary art in the continent because they've come back home, and when others were saying nothing can be done in the continent, they came back and inspired people like us, and inspired people like myself and many other young curators who have now taken the reins of the developing and making sure that the visibility of African art in the continent is wide. So I think that on its own, to me, is something which we need to recognize as curators. But we also need to be mindful of the challenges that the continent is facing, and especially now because of the COVID-19, that our mobility is going to be limited. But this 21st century technology can also get us closer to each other, because like today we had a rare conversation with somebody in Norway, somebody in Lagos, somebody in Harare. So it really brings us together. So I think we have to take an opportunity that is existing now and to make the best out of it.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think that it's interesting that now we also have a kind of a closer connection. You know, I did early in the lockdown period for us, which started about 63 days or something. I can't remember. One day it's a little bit the same as the next. But I spoke a bit to you about 6 weeks ago. We had a conversation, I think, for the first time in many years, since I saw you actually in Venice. I mean, like, and engage. But I also want to talk to you about something that has come up in our conversations over the last couple of weeks, also spearheaded by our director, Koyo Kuo, who I have an amazing privilege to work with. I also blame her for my return to South Africa directly. Very thankful for that opportunity. Really an extraordinary opportunity. But we've been starting to really engage in a notion of kind of solidarity. And also radical solidarity. And I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts on what solidarity is and how that can play out, and how do we action solidarity. Just curious about your thoughts on that, and maybe also how it affects you and your kind of vision for how we can work and collaborate in the future.
Well, firstly, I would like to say, you know, when you talk about solidarity, I mean, firstly, what comes into my mind is the political solidarity that our leaders have. SADC, the African Union, and the AU, as we're celebrating Africa Day on Monday. But solidarity that we need within our art institutions is more urgent than ever, because we meet more in Europe than we meet in the continent. I'm sure the collaboration that happened between the Zeitz MOCAA and the National Gallery by realizing the 5 bob is something which we need to extend. And it is that solidarity that can bring our artists together, that can bring us as cultural leaders together, and for us to also look at what we can realize, because we all have our weaknesses and strengths. So it is that solidarity that can bring us together to realize more projects. Other than, yeah, we can do projects with other international organizations or international cultural institutions, but it is this solidarity, the African solidarity, that the politicians have, and take advantage of that so much that at least these institutions, what they can realize more together is huge. And we have not taken advantage of what that means to us as cultural workers and as cultural leaders.
And absolutely, and I totally hear you on that. And you know, the possibility for collaboration is really huge, and also like exchange in a way that we also build capacity. You know, Zeitz MOCAA is a young institution. It's going to be a young institution for a very long time. We're also in the process of learning and also kind of institution making as process of, you know, it's a constant. So we're also looking at future exchanges would be fantastic. But I also just wanted to give a shout out to about a little bit more about the 5 bob exhibition, rated also by Thandazani Dlakama, who is a colleague now at Zeitz MOCAA, but she was previously also at the National Gallery. But that was a very important project, because I think I want to talk a little bit about the, you know, we can talk about solidarity, but I also have to say that we have really challenges that is partially historic about when it comes to these kind of engagements, suggestions of solidarity, but it's also more than, and that's what I saw the exhibition before I started working at Zeitz MOCAA, and at the time I was also quite critical of the institution, but I walked into that exhibition and I saw things that I've never seen before, and it made me also quite embarrassed for how little I knew about the kind of a recent art history of Zimbabwe. It was an extraordinary exhibition, and I think it had a lot to say also about the way that it was put together. It was a really extraordinary show, and I can say that, you know, kind of really because it was a revelation in many ways for me, and it also made me think again about how, you know, from talking about myself as a South African, how, you know, kind of growing up through apartheid, how so much of our, you know, backs, you know, we were not part of the continent. We were not part of the formation of the African Union. And so that realization and those borders kind of disappearing, the kind of work that we also need to do. But it's important. And I think I also wanted to talk a little bit about that kind of like the borders and how we sometimes have difficulty navigating it, and also understanding how closely actually
yes, we can talk about collaboration, which is very, very important for the development of the art in the continent and in the region. But one thing which we need to talk about for our governments to open up these borders, because at the end of the day, why collaborations within the continent are so limited, it's not easy to take an exhibition from here to Lagos, or to take an exhibition from Lagos to Harare, or an exhibition from Dakar to Cape Town. So that on its own, they need to understand the role of cultural tourism. And I would like to end by the French President Macron that let's celebrate Africa in Dakar, in Cape Town, in Harare, in Lusaka, in Nairobi. But if we want to celebrate Africa in Africa, we need to make sure that the mobility of artworks and cultural goods within this region is opened up, so much that at least the cultural tourism, like you're rightly saying that when you walked into the Five Bob exhibition, you realize that there's more to learn about Zimbabwean artists, the current, new generation of Zimbabwean artists. But that can only happen when an exhibition of that nature is taken to yet another context. It can educate, it can inform people. So I'm sure we are not, as Africa, we are not realizing the importance of culture and the role of culture in the continent, as much as it is realized across the boundaries. And the Venice Biennales, the Berlin Biennale, and many of those cultural institutions that are there in Europe, they milk money from tourists because of that. So I'm sure there's a need for us to also work together to be able to convince our authorities to see what role culture plays and what role these artists play, because they are the first ambassadors before the ambassadors were sent to those countries, because they travel a lot. They're jet setting from one airport to another, and who knows with this COVID-19 what it is going. But through this interaction we are having now, we are also crossing the borders without authorities. But I still feel that the real exhibitions like Five Bob and many other exhibitions in Dakar, in Bamako, are also very, very important.
Absolutely, and to kind of also find ways that for circulation, but it's also going to kind of, I think, where are the blocks? How do we kind of move through these issues and problems? For example, like on a simple level, I understand there was also difficulties in understanding bringing artwork across the border to the Zeitz MOCAA show. Your team was very involved in that process of navigating that, for example. So it's these kind of like issues that we face, which is bureaucratic and it's political and it's structural as well. But we also need a concerted effort and put our heads together, and what that looks like would be really important. And you're right. Also, I think that the possibility of kind of conversation and engagement and just like seeing each other and like engage and talking is a very important aspect of that process and to start it.
Well, I'm sure dialogue is very key. And I mean, if we look back into the Agenda 2063 by the African Union, it's something which needs to be interrogated. And I mean, when I look at celebrating Africa Day on Monday, and I celebrate Africa Day every day. And I'm sure, but the need for us to look at it from that perspective of making sure that these cultural goods, their mobility, they can benefit our audience, they can benefit the fiscus, they can benefit, because remember our institutions as museums, these are cultural hubs. These are knowledge hubs that are there to educate people and that are there to promote what Africa is, because we cannot show in the West alone, and yet we don't show. Yeah. I'm sure the idea to engage the AU and the idea to engage our ministers in our relevant countries, for them, it's just as good as how we manage to educate our authorities here for us to have the visibility of Zimbabwe. Up to the present, the last Biennale, which was in 2019, I mean, which is now basically funded by the Zimbabwean government. I'm sure the 2 editions were co-funded by both the Zimbabwean government and some relevant partners. That includes European Union, that includes British Council, that includes the Museum of Monaco, Pro-Helvetia, and many others. But it's very important for us as cultural workers to be part of kind of a catalyst to that dialogue within the authorities, because otherwise, sometimes I always say to people, when you're knocking at these doors, and I remember saying this when I was in Nairobi in Kenya, when we were trying to talk to see how Kenya can have a Kenyan pavilion. I said, do not knock like, if you're going to knock like this, it's going to be hard. The government officials, so much that at least they can understand. And our presentation to our ideas is very, very important, because remember, arts education within our institutions was a preserve of the few. So those understanding of what role art plays is still very limited, but you can only educate slowly, and it's a process. And dialogue, it is very, very important for us to arrive to that destination.
No, it's important, and I hear you, and that's definitely also the work that we need to do. I don't know if there's any questions from anybody that's watching. Please show it while we have this extraordinary human with us. Yeah, but thank you, Raphael. I think it's a really important aspect to us to think about this notion of education as well. And that happens on so many different levels. I'm also curious, in some of our early conversations, you were speaking about some of your research projects that you're working on. I'm curious about a little bit further ahead in terms of your scheduling and planning. What projects do you engage in at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I mean, we had another exhibition which was due to open, which was to mark one online exhibition. That's a huge priority, because it is actually closed to the public at the moment. So, like yesterday, we had a meeting with all our partners to make sure that at least we can have this exhibition online before the end of June, and also looking into how we can increase our online visibility as a gallery. So we're also establishing a digital back office. That's one project we are busy working on. And then we're also looking into, this year was supposed to host our International Congress on African Culture. So that we have now put it on hold because of the COVID-19, and I'm sure all art events have been put on hold. But as a new person who is coming in as the acting director of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, I think my immediate project would be to see how best we can move post-COVID-19. And with all the restrictions that we have to follow through ICOM, through CIMAM, and all the international museum bodies, is something which I think my team, we are going to look into as National Gallery of Zimbabwe and see how then can we survive post-COVID-19. So that's one thing we are working on. And I'm also interested in looking into future projects of the National Gallery. That includes the Venice Biennale, which now has been postponed to 2022, which I think a noble idea, given that Italy was the epicenter of COVID-19, and we still send our condolences to all those who have been affected, who have lost their families, friends, relatives, to all the countries, including our country, Zimbabwe, which has so far has lost 4 people. And I think there's a need for us to think about forever. And that would be another question to you to say, what is the future of the Zeitz MOCAA post-COVID-19?
You know, Raphael, we really use this this moment to do some really deep kind of reflection and work and research. And I think for us, it's been really quite a radical realignment and readjustment. And to really say that there are no more rules. Okay, there's nothing that says that we should do anything like it was done in the past, even if we have a short past. It's interesting how quickly habits form, or kind of like things are accepted as the norm. We in a situation where we are facing radical challenges economically. You know, so much of our income is generated through ticket sales. We we're not funded. We don't have grants by government. It's private funders. You know, we rely on grants in a small way at the moment. But, you know, like suddenly with 60 to 70% of our income disappearing literally overnight, it's been a big shock. So we've had to rationalize quite substantially in terms of our programming. So our immediate reaction was to also just push out things, like take more time before we go into it, cut expenses in the short term radically. There was a big effort from the museum leadership to also make sure that staff is looked after and that they're supported and safe during this process. And so we are really also kind of back at the drawing board with thinking how we do what we do and the most effective way. And I think, like many institutions, we also realized that our local audience in the short term is going to be very important for us, as it always was. You know, we've made always a big commitment to access to the museum. We had like a free half day on a Wednesday, but anybody with an African passport would get free access to the museum. You know, kind of those kind of like aspects. But the actual exhibitions that we are doing too is going to be a shift, and so we're planning to reopen with a new exhibition that is going to throw a lot of rules out of the window. And we're also looking at a series of programming engagements. It's like a really important way for us to really think forward. And I see Koya also has mentioned here about you know, that it's interesting for us also to think about how artists can support institutions. But so that's where we are. And I think there's, of course, like projects and platforms that we are developing. We're looking at alternative income streams. There's, you know, grant proposals are written. But I think there's also an aspect of a kind of a loosening of things that I think is important. But I think like kind of we have definitely work to do. And that's an ongoing process. I want to say that we are thinking about ourselves as an institution in the making, and that process is also part of a critical engagement of how the institution is forming. And so, yes, I think we also have been reaching out to others in our situation. We've held stakeholder meetings with Cape Town institutions and heritage organizations. We've reached out to arts organizations, arts education partners of us to meet. We've been doing these engagements similar to the one we're doing tonight. And I think this is all part of us and kind of like just saying that we are not doing this and we cannot do this alone. And that I think everybody, they support that we are kind of like navigating and develop. So, and I also think it's kind of like how we approach as a sector. I think we're establishing new shapes, and I think I hope and it's unthinkable, and so that we are not flippant about these moments and to see it as moments of opportunity, but really as something much more urgent than that. I went on a little bit of a ramble, but I think your question prompted something really interesting for me to say that. Just to recap a little bit, that we are thinking very radically and differently about things.
But I mean, the issue of social distancing disinfection, sanitization, and all that. But how are you going to, as a museum, because it's like all the time, sometimes when I visit Cape Town, at the museum, you see huge crowds coming in. How are you going to control all that? Because it's going to be the thing of the past. But how do you handle, especially exhibition openings, guided tours, and those schools coming in?
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's the thing. We will have to realign. I think we are busy with kind of like workshopping how that is going to work out on a practical level. We are also looking at some of our the museum sisters that are like opening up in other parts of Europe now slowly. I think I lost you a little bit. Raphael, I think you might be paused, but I'll just carry on. We're also looking at what the examples are from other institutions. It is going to shift. I think we have to just adjust ourselves that it's not going to be business as usual. He's tuning in. Okay, I'm getting him back in. Great. Thanks for your patience. Hey, you're back.
Yes.
Great. So just in terms of our planning, I mean, it's going to be quite pedantic, and that's legislated on a South African side. We expect it already to be quite stringent. The requirements for just getting staff back into the museum is also, you know, we had minimal staff, like basically some facilities people and security in the museum for the last 2 months. You know, everybody's been working from home. And now we're actually going into the phase of planning for that moment. We don't even know when we can open the museum again to the public. We're expecting, you know, a guess is right now just a guess, but we are planning for it. And we're expecting to be quite detailed about that. We are thankful that we have relatively lots of space, but we will have to find ways to kind of channel people through that. It seems from other institutions a very clinical process, and hopefully we can find a balance, you know, for people going through it in such a measured way. We need an adjustment, I think, but not only how you view art and how we're going to engage in these institutions, but how we also meet each other in these spaces. Like, I'm already kind of not sure how I'm going to handle it, wanting to see colleagues that I haven't seen for like 2 months, and we can't hug them, each other. You know, like it's that the kind of connection or having a drink together, and like, you know, you know, the kind of social aspects of is so much of what we do, right?
Yeah. But anyway, what mechanisms have you put in place to mitigate the COVID-19 shocks and effects?
It's an ongoing process right now, Raphael. Honestly, it's like something that we're negotiating all the time. There's a big effort to grant applications. We are really looking at ways that we can. We are looking at ways that we can also think about, you know, kind of grow membership. But these are kind of like also something that we didn't want to kind of rush too much into things. I think it's also, we have to be quite measured about this and take our time. And so far, I think the kind of plotting has been, you know, quite, you know, structured, but also like taking a little bit of time, not to jump into anything, not to, you know, trying things, and taking a little bit of approach of like understanding how things are unfolding. Because right now, I think any, you know, kind of really radical, you know, kind of sharp decision making is not the way to go. So we will make those measures, you know, and also like thinking about the public coming back into the building. It's something that we will take very seriously and will be guided largely by legislation.
Well, I mean, this is, it's like when we had a conversation a few weeks ago. I mean, for us here at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, I had 5 points which we needed to look at, which is to react, to respond, reflect, and reimagine. Because, I mean, what COVID-19 has put all of us and economies, countries into, it's something which is unthinkable. And I'm sure for us as public institutions and private institutions, museums and galleries, is something which, like you said, we don't have to jump into decisions. We need to reflect, and we need to take time to really digest, because this is going to be business unusual going forward. Because, like in your situation, that the museum ticketing was like kind of a revenue stream, but all that has been wiped out, and the idea of trying to rethink and refocus to see what other mainstream or other income streams the museum can have.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I think is very, very, very important. But I mean, I'm really concerned about the future of other museums within the continent, because most museums in Europe, they are used to huge budgets, and those budgets are being rediverted into other things. But what about your collection? How are you going to create visibility for the collection?
Well, I mean, we have a dedicated space at the museum for the collection. Generally, some shifts that the organization has already gone through in the last year was to museum for part of the collection to be shown in very focused, smaller footprint, curated exhibitions, very strong kind of like thematics, and also like prompt more kind of in-depth research into objects that are in the collection. So, I mean, that's an important aspect of the museum. But we've made a shift towards projects with solo exhibitions by artists, solo projects, more in-depth, larger scale projects. So that's an important way for us to also kind of like delve into and be more specific about the kind of discourses that we are kind of developing. And kind of through artist practice and artists, as opposed to more kind of generic aspects that has been unfortunately the reality for much of a lot of discourse around contemporary African art. So to be specific as opposed to generic, and that artists are the kind of vehicles for us to kind of channel that through. But I think the collection, of course, is a very important part for us.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a question there which is which says, I'm sure it's from Mango Kobo. He says it is now right moment to think seriously about growing a young Black art collector base. How do we begin to encourage this on the continent? And this is a very loaded question. Do you want to tackle
I mean, I have some thoughts on that. I think it comes to be a little bit about what you said earlier about the work that we do as institutions to educate. And like an educate can also be like something that I want to take if you want to say I need to educate you, it can also be slightly pejorative, and I don't mean it in that way at all. Like, kind of we have ways to also like engage and encourage. Well, so we've reached the end of our hour conversation. So it automatically cuts out. So I just want us to hear if there's any kind of concluding things that you want to say. But again, just thank you so much for the engagement tonight. And it's really great to be in conversation with you. And I mean that also beyond this particular conversation. I really look forward to further develop the relationship with you. And again, thank you also for the incredible support that you've given Zeitz MOCAA as a young nascent institution already, and your contribution to also ensuring our success, because that is so important, I think, in terms of this notion of solidarity, is to also look out for others, and you've already done that, kind of in such extraordinary ways, you and your institution and colleagues. So thank you for that also.
No, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I would like to say that your success as Zeitz MOCAA's institution, as an institution, is our success. So I think it is very important if we look at it from that perspective, as institutions, as cultural workers, so much that at least we can support each other, we can collaborate more, and those collaborations are happening across the waters in Europe. where museums are collaborating a lot. And
Yes.
this needs to happen in the continent so much that at least we can grow.
Absolutely.
Like somebody was asking, what are you doing about young curators? We can also grow the curatorial skills within the continent by these collaborations, because the young curators can learn from the senior curators, and the cycle goes on. And I'm sure those are some of the last words I would like to say, that we are safe in numbers, and growing the contemporary art in the continent, it is our duty and our role, but we cannot do that alone. We need
Absolutely.
to work together.
No, thank you,
So
and thank you for that.
And let it not just be a talk, but let's talk and do.
I totally agree with you. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
and wish you a wonderful evening, and we'll talk very soon again.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Zeitz MOCAA team for organizing this. And I would like to say, asante sana. Thank you, Siyabonga.
Thank you very much, Raphael. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night.
Ciao.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye. Take care.